Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first webinar of 2023. Thank you for being patient with us. We wanted to spend the month of January getting ready for this excellent year with all of you. So we are very excited to get started. All right, so as always, I do like to start by introducing myself. If you've been in our webinars before, you probably know who I am. If you have not, welcome. We are excited for you to be here. My name is Adina Glincher, and I am the Senior HR Services Advisor here at PayEntry. I am not an attorney, I am an HR professional, so nothing that we tell you today or that you see in the slide should constitute legal advice. If you have questions for your legal team, please reach out to them directly. However, if you have questions about the content of the training or questions about our services offered here at PayEntry, please do reach out to our team at hrservices@payentry.com. Or if you are already a client, you can reach out to your dedicated HR advisor. All right, now that we got that out of the way, let's begin. So today we're going to be talking about HR audits and really prepping for 2023. I know that sounds silly, we've already started the year, but there's still preparation to be done. We're going to cover what an HR audit is, the benefits of conducting an audit, common audits, and then we're going to focus on some function-specific audits. We'll discuss what to audit, when to audit, who should do the audit, and then the HR audit process, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. So feel free to put any questions you have in the questions box. All right, and if you can count how many times I say audit through this presentation, you get bonus points. All righty, so what is an HR audit? An audit reviews your business's HR policies, practices, documentation, and systems. They may include using questionnaires that ask for the evaluation of specific practice areas and interviewing a designated individual to learn more about your procedures. Audits can help minimize lawsuits or violations if you appropriately act on the outcome and recommendations made. Want to stop for a minute on that last one. Doing an audit is a great first step, but if you do an audit and identify all the areas you need to improve on and then don't actually act on those, it's not really going to benefit you. So it's important that you actually create a plan to act on your findings, which we'll talk about in the process later in the presentation. And then the overall goal of most HR audits is to really identify areas and opportunities where compliance and processes can be improved. If you are a current HR services client with PayEntry, this will sound very familiar to you because you likely started your service with an audit so that we were able to identify the areas that needed improvement and how we were able to best support you. So this is probably not new to anybody. Let's talk about why audits are important and what the benefits are. I'm going to pause for just a moment. Before I get into this slide, I did forget to mention there is a handout section of the presentation. So you should see the word handouts written on your little toolbar. You can feel free to download a copy of the slides from the presentation today. If you would like to follow along or you would just like to access them for a review, feel free to do so. So the benefits of an audit are, first and foremost, they help evaluate whether your HR practices help, hinder, or have little impact on business goals. It helps identify areas that may need improvement and provides a true roadmap to problems before they become unmanageable. It allows you to be proactive. Assists with compliance related to federal, state, and local laws, and can assist with the maintenance of secure and reliable records and documentation. Generally, audits uncover many things and areas for improvement, including record retention, personnel files, etc. I don't know about all of you, but it's 11 o'clock my time, it's before lunch, and this slide makes me incredibly hungry. So we threw this in just as an example for everybody to understand the impact of being compliant. So Krispy Kreme, I'm sure most of us know what that business does. They had to pay more than $1.1 million to 516 workers after the Department of Labor found systematic overtime violations. So what's interesting about this case is it actually started at a single Krispy Kreme location in Louisville, Kentucky. And through their findings, they realized that these issues were likely widespread throughout the entire company. So that caused the Department of Labor to actually audit the entire Krispy Kreme company and determine that this amount of money was due back to their employees for the failure to pay correct overtime wages. So this just goes to show how, a single audit from the Department of Labor or your state regulatory agency can really open up lots of cans of worms. So it is important that you are compliant. All right, so you may have heard of a few different kind of HR audits, so we wanted to cover them today. The first and foremost is the one we're going to be talking about mostly, and that's the compliance audit. So as mentioned, it focuses on how well the organization is complying with current federal, state, and local laws and regulations. There is such thing as a best practice audit. What that does is it helps the organization maintain or improve by comparing its practices with those of companies identified as having exceptional practices. So you're comparing yourself against others, maybe the same size or the same industry, etc. Strategic audits focus on strengths and weaknesses of systems and processes to determine whether they actually align with the HR department and the overall company goal too. So generally the HR department is there to support the company and its mission or its goal. So it's important to conduct a strategic audit to make sure it is truly doing that. And lastly, the function-specific audit focuses on a specific area in the HR function, such as payroll, performance management, or record retention, and allows you to really dig into that specific area. So because we are an HR department, we are focusing today on this function-specific audit. So on the left side of the screen in the different colors, you'll see different areas that we recommend you look into and you audit within your organization. And soon we'll get into who can actually do this audit, but just know that we are here to support you. If you're interested in our services, we can do this on your behalf. So when it comes to an employee handbook or policies, the audit focuses on company practices that comply with current federal, state, and local laws and regulations. This kind of audit also allows you and the person doing the audit to really identify whether your policies actually align with your practices. We all know an employee handbook is not legally required, but we also know if you have one, you legally have to follow it. So it is extremely important to make sure that the policies within your handbook actually align with the procedures. Recruitment and hiring practices is a big one as well. It will help you understand if your recruitment process is effective in attracting your ideal candidate. We all know this market is unique and a little bit crazy. So it is important to really take a step back and audit these practices to determine if they are helping you find the candidates you need and you want for your organization, or maybe it's time to change things up. Employee onboarding demonstrates a return on your onboarding investment and the impact the new employee experience creates. We all know that retention starts at the very, very beginning. We need to attract great candidates and we need to onboard them well. Exit processes. So similar to onboarding, we have offboarding. It's important that you audit your exit processes to determine if required notices are being provided, final pay requirements are being met, time off benefit payouts are, compliant, benefits, record keeping, etc. Ensure that you are auditing your training. So not only the trainings that you are choosing to provide, maybe the company you're using for the trainings or the individual who's conducting the training or the material, but also that you are auditing whether or not you live in a state where certain trainings may be required, such as harassment prevention training. It is important to ensure your employees are adequately trained in compliance with applicable laws. And lastly, the other category, so other best practices such as performance management, job description, safety, DEI initiatives, benefits, and compensation. All right, so we talked about the different kind of audits and focused a little into the function-specific audits. Now, let's talk about what you truly are auditing when you are conducting these. So organizations are particularly, vulnerable in certain areas, including misclassification of employees, so whether or not they're exempt or non-exempt, or an independent contractor or employee, prohibited attendance policies. Just so you all know, we're going to be digging into these even further in the next few slides. So don't worry, we'll add a little to this. So it's important that your attendance policies comply with FMLA, ADA, pregnancy leave laws, etc. You should be auditing timekeeping. So make sure that meal breaks are being taken if required in your state, that wages are being paid correctly and on time, and the same thing with overtime, and that records of time worked are actually being taken by your non-exempt employees. So they're clocking in and out or writing it on a timesheet, whatever that looks like. It's important to it is important to audit personnel files. This is one of those areas as HR professionals we find are commonly done incorrectly, unfortunately. So it's important to audit. First and foremost, do you have personnel files? How many do you have for each employee? Are they accurate and consistent? And then are you really keeping personal health information or medical information separate from the personnel file itself? Once again, we'll be digging into this during the presentation. And lastly, a huge one, the Form I-9. This is the #1 thing audited by the Department of Labor, so it is important that you have I-9s for your employees and that they are completed correctly. All right, so let's dig into the first one, misclassification threats that can trigger an audit. So if you have an independent contractor who files an unemployment claim, that's going to trigger a red flag. The reason being, unemployment may investigate the wages reported by the employer, and if there are no wages reported, this may trigger an audit. Generally, independent contractors do not qualify for unemployment. So this is going to lead the Department of Labor or your state regulatory agency into a true investigation, more than likely. Next, if you have a worker who receives both a W-2 and 1099 in a single tax year, that may bring up a big red flag as well. Generally, not always, but generally workers are classified as either an employee or an independent contractor. So for them to get both the W-2 and the 1099, in the same tax year, it's pretty rare. And then just not understanding employee classification is a big threat as well. It's important that employers invest in training for themselves and their management team to better understand classification requirements. We did do an employee classification webinar not too long ago. You can find it on our Payentry HR services page. So if you do Payentry, if you go to www.payentry.com/webinars, you should be able to find it there or on our YouTube channel. And remember, in today's workforce, employees are more educated and reminded of their rights than ever before. So employees know what their rights are. So it is important that as an employer, you are truly complying with the laws to make sure that your employees are treated fair and consistently. All right, next we want to dig into the attendance policies. So let's talk about a no-fault attendance policy. A no-fault attendance policy simply counts the number of times the employee is late or is not present for work, with escalating levels of correction as the employee accrues points for each occurrence. The policy is no fault, which means the points accrue for every single absence, regardless of the reason for the absence. So why is this a problem? If the employee is missing work due to a reason protected by FMLA or ADA, a similar leave law or pregnancy law, or other related protection, the employer could face legal liability. So insight for all of you as employers, make sure that you are thoroughly reviewing your FMLA, your ADA, any leave and or medical disability policies. It's important that you post the Department of Labor's FMLA and other applicable notices where it can be viewed by employees and applicants. Audit your practices and procedures used by managers when an employee reports an absence that may be covered by a protected leave. What are your managers saying to employees when they call in and say, you know what, I'm not going to make it today because I had to go to the hospital for X, Y, or Z? Are your managers asking appropriate or correct questions? And do the procedures ensure that all requests reach the appropriate department? So maybe HR should be handling those calls. Make sure that you are training your employees. There are so many examples out there of employers who have had to pay out a lot of money because their manager said something foolish or didn't know how to properly handle a leave situation or an absence situation or did not follow procedures. So make sure you have the proper policies in place and that you're training your management team so that they are appropriately conducting those policies. All right, next we dig into timekeeping best practices. So it is important, as mentioned, to implement a method for timekeeping, and that may vary depending on your company. Maybe you use a time clock system, paper time card, or an electronic system. Define the work week. So the work week is any 7 consecutive 24-hour periods. Make sure that's defined. This is important for overtime purposes. Establish procedures in accordance with the payroll schedule for submitting timekeeping records and for approval. Establish a policy requiring non-exempt employees to record all hours worked. Define the process for making corrections to time records, including any approval required. Maintain time records in compliance with federal and state laws. And of course, if you need further information on that, reach out to our team. Make sure you are storing your time records securely and protected from any damage, and limit access to time records to those with a legitimate business purpose. Next, we're going to touch on employee file best practices. And we always like to mention during our webinars that these are meant to be very general information. So if you have further questions into any of this or you want additional information, reach out to our team and we can talk to you about our different HR services offerings. So all the documentation that you have on an employee related to their employment activities is considered part of their employment record. And we list some examples on this slide. You should have at least 3 files for each employee. Yes, I know that is overwhelming, but 3 is the magic number. A personnel file, which many of you probably have already, a benefits and medical file, and then a payroll/confidential file is generally what we recommend. A personnel file, you put all those things you already probably have in a personnel file in. Then we ask that you take out anything from what your current personnel file for the medical file. That's any doctor's note, any FMLA request, anything that has any health information on it. The reason being, 2 reasons, or 2 big reasons, I should say. One, if a personnel file is ever subpoenaed, it's important that you're not sending personal health information to whoever subpoenaed that. That's protected in a different manner. Secondly, medical files need to be kept for a lot longer than personnel files. So for record retention purposes, it is much easier to keep those separately. And lastly, we recommend a payroll/confidential file. And really that should include anything that has your employee's social security number on it or other confidential information. And our team has a really wonderful personnel file checklist that we provide to our clients as part of our HR services packages that goes into not only, these 3 files, but even more if you choose to have more, and actually talks about the different documents that should be in each of those. And then lastly, you should be maintaining recruitment files for each position you fill in a separate file for your I-9s. Those should not be in the personnel or confidential file. Those should be in a completely separate file or binder. All right. So lastly, we're going to talk about the I-9 audit and how to conduct it. First and foremost, gather all your I-9 forms and check to make sure you have one for every employee. That's the first step. Employers should have 2 separate I-9 files, or potentially one separated into 2 different categories, one for your current employees and one for your terminated employees. Make sure that you obtain the Form I-9s for current employees who are missing them. Explain that the form must be completed under federal law and that the employee will not be able to continue working for the organization if he or she cannot provide these documents. If you have one for all employees, of course, you can skip this step. Now it's time to audit the actual form. So employers should be reviewing sections 1, 2, and 3. If there are errors, make sure that you make a list of the errors. This will help for the audit log, and it will show that you as the employer are making a good faith effort to ensure compliance. And there are special ways to correct those errors should you find any. And once an employee is terminated, employers are actually required to keep that I-9 for 3 years after the employee's date of hire, or for 1 year following the employee's date of termination, whichever is later. So depending on how long that employee has worked for you, which will depend on which one you need to follow. And employers should also retain the Form I-9 audit logs and communications to employees regarding the I-9 audit process, and may wish to keep the audit documentation in a separate Form I-9 file, or to place this documentation in their files with the I-9 forms themselves. All right, and I see there are some questions coming in. Keep them coming. We will address them at the end. When should you be conducting an audit? Great question. Don't wait for issues to come up. Taking a proactive approach is better than a reactive one. The best time of year will, of course, depend on your organization's needs and schedule. However, it's generally recommended that you do this on a slower time of year, just because there may be a lot going on in your busy season, and you really want to take some time to focus on this. The end of the year or the beginning of the year can help an organization improve year to year. It just allows you to maybe audit it at the same time every year and keep track of that. And it's important that organizations consider doing an audit at least once a year, or following any really significant changes or events, such as new plans, growth, or management changes. All right, who should conduct the audit? So you have a few options here. Your HR professional or your HR manager or a member of your leadership team can conduct the audit. It is preferred that they are familiar with your department and they have the expertise and time to do so, of course. An HR consultant, so maybe you bring on a company such as PayEntry to do this for you on your behalf. Audits touch on many different aspects of your HR practices, as that has been made very clear. So it is often beneficial to look for a full service HR partner or somebody who has a lot of experience doing audits. If an organization has a legitimate concern or many concerns regarding the company's non-compliance, and you are worried that maybe back wages or some type of compensation may be due to your employees, consider hiring outside legal counsel to do the audit. And it's important that HR audits are thorough and objective, so make sure that whoever is doing it has the experience and skills necessary to do so before conducting one. All right, now we're going to talk about the audit process. So first and foremost, it's important to determine the scope and the kind of audit you want done. Develop the audit questionnaire, collect the data, benchmark the findings, provide feedback about the results. This next one, I think, is the biggest one. Create that action plan. And then, of course, emphasize continuous improvement. An audit is not a one-time thing. It should be continually improved upon and, like we mentioned, audited year to year, preferably. So we're going to dig into each of these steps. First and foremost, to determine the scope and the type of audit. If the organization has never audited its HR functions, or if significant organizational changes have occurred, consider a comprehensive review of all of your HR practices. If concerns are limited, identify the specific process or policy. Develop the audit questionnaire. Invest sufficient time in developing a comprehensive document that elicits information on all subjects of the inquiry. Make sure that you clearly list what information you need and from whom. So for an example of this might be, you might be auditing practices within multiple departments in your organization. So you're going to need different documents or forms from each of those departments. So make sure that you have a list of everything you need in order to be successful in the audit. Collect the necessary data. So use the audit questionnaire as a roadmap to review the specific areas identified within the scope of the audit. Reference the questionnaire as you go to ensure nothing is forgotten along the way. Benchmark the findings. So compare the audit findings with HR benchmarks. The comparison will offer insight into how the audit results compare against other similarly sized organizations. Whoops, all right. Provide feedback. So summarize the data and provide feedback to the organization's HR professional and senior management team or appropriate party in the form of findings and recommendations. Findings are typically reduced to a written report with recommendations prioritized based on risk level. As part of our pay entry HR service packages, what we do is we conduct an audit and then we present the findings in what we like to call a 12-month plan. And by doing this, we are able to really prioritize what every business's goals and priorities are, as well as what we identify to be those big ticket items that should be audited first or should be fixed first based on our HR knowledge. So we're able to prioritize based on risk level. And then you should be creating an action plan. So from the final recommendation, make sure that you are developing a timeline, such as a 12-month plan, for action that will help determine the order in which to address the issues raised. And it is critical that the organization acts with the information identified as a result of an audit. We talked about that. An audit's great, but it's really important that you're doing something with that information. And then foster continuous improvement. HR leaders and/or leadership must engage in constant observation and continuous improvement of the organization's policies, procedures, and practices. Keep track of the audit findings and changes made, turnover, complaints filed, employee concerns, and employee survey results to identify problematic issues. This leads us back to why it's so important to be doing one-on-ones with your employees and annual reviews to really be getting this feedback. Sometimes the feedback you get during those meetings brings up, a point or a point in discussion that may require further auditing or further investigation. Areas of improvement can help in the decision of where to allocate your time, your money, and your training resources. All right. So we thought this would be just some great information to provide all of you. The wage and hour division had to pay an immense amount of money in back wages in 2022. So this is real data. You could see that we have each industry split up in different colors at the top. So we have healthcare, construction, agriculture workers, retail, food service, and building services. And that is, each little rectangle has the amount of money that was owed back to employees in wages in that industry, excuse me. So in fiscal year 2022, the wage and hour division answered more than 913,000 calls from employees. The same division investigations in fiscal year 2022 found on average that $1,393 were due to each employee for back wages. So I know many of you are small businesses or family-owned businesses, and you're not looking to just, well, most people aren't looking to just throw money away. It's important to be investing your money in truly important things that are going to allow you to save in the long run. And an HR service or an HR professional is definitely that. I mean, obviously I'm a little biased being one myself, but the amount of money you pay for an HR professional to come in and do an audit and tell you what you need to fix is nothing compared to the amount that could be owed in back wages if certain practices are not compliant. In DOL or Department of Labor audits, they happen. So it's important to prepare for them. You can take proactive steps to audit your internal processes before it's audited by your regulatory agency to truly identify red flags or concerns. So here we list some important steps employers should consider. Conduct regular internal audits, like we've been talking about. Review the job descriptions, classifications, etc. Ensure proper calculations of hours worked, overtime, and off-the-clock work. Ensure accurate timekeeping methods and records, including for remote workers. Review contractor and vendor agreements to ensure proper classifications. Make sure you are reviewing your FMLA practices and forms or similar leave practices and forms, depending on your state. Ensure that your workplace posters are complete, up to date, and in the right place. So we put complete on there because a lot of times we notice that employers have the workplace posters posted, but they're not actually filled out. So if you notice that there are some blanks on your posters hanging on the walls in your organization, make sure that you are completing those. Review and resolve inconsistencies in records and address areas of concern. Review your handbook regularly for completeness and legal compliance at least once a year. Train your staff on the basics of FMLA, overtime, and timekeeping. Train your managers on key wage and hour and FMLA concepts, and familiarize them with DOL investigation and audit rights. As part of our service, we offer management training as well. So if that's something your managers are not familiar with, let us know. And establish a DOL investigation response team and audit protocols. And of course, we are here to help. We don't like to just throw all the information at you without any assistance. We want to help you. So as part of our HR services packages, our HR professionals can help actually conduct compliance audits for you, provide you with personnel file checklists, keep up with the changing state and federal laws, and of course, with any day-to-day HR best practices, forms, policies, and more. And our compliance package, which is our most common package, also includes a learning management system with a broad array of employee and manager trainings, including state compliant harassment prevention training. All right. I'm curious, did anybody keep track of how many times the word audit was said? I think it was probably too many to keep track of. So I am going to dig into the question box now, and let's see what was asked. Do the Department of Labor's FMLA and other notices are they required to be posted in view of applicants in all states? It's going to depend on the notice. Most of them are required to be posted in a conspicuous place where your employees can see them. Not all of them need to be posted in where applicants can see, but yes, DOL notices need to be posted in all states, regardless of what state you're in. But depending on what notice your question is about will depend on whether or not applicants need to be able to view them. We have been doing online I-9s during the pandemic. I heard that in-person verification will return again in July. It may just be a California-specific requirement. In-person verification is said to be returning. Yes, I believe it's July, but I can double check that and get back to you. It's important to note that if you're doing online I-9 verification, that those are for solely remote employees. If somebody is a hybrid employee or comes into the office on a regular basis, they do need to be auditing those forms in person. So just keep that in mind. If you were to get audited and they want to review payroll timesheets, would they audit the final approved process timesheets or the timesheets in the time clock that have employee mispunches and adjustments? Do you keep both in a payroll binder? It looks like that person has left. Otherwise, I would ask for clarification. Give me a moment. Yeah, I will have to email that person directly because I need some clarification there. As a follow-up, can you send us the personnel file checklist? Great question. The checklist, as well as our other templates and forms, are actually available to our clients only. If you have a one-off question, you are welcome to email our team and we're happy to answer your question. But any template or forms are available to our HR services clients. So if you're interested in the service, let us know and we're happy to chat through that further with you. All right. Well, 81. Wow. Thank you for keeping track. Somebody just typed in, I said it about 81 times. So I apologize for that number. That's pretty crazy. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you for keeping track of that. We really appreciate your time. We will be doing these webinars every other week on Thursday at the same time, the 2 o'clock Eastern time. So definitely join us. If you want to check out our upcoming webinars, go ahead and go to payentry.com/webinars. And we appreciate you all for being here today. Thank you again. Goodbye.